Welcome back. This time around, I am doing one of my rare and not too often done guides. This time to Nexus Spike, that very odd, broken, confusing, concealed caverns event. I will be covering a variety of things. I'll be covering, of course, the mechanics of how Nexus Spike works. I'll be covering certain combos, certain non-bows, as well as some strategies for things to put in them, and some of the very unique interactions you can gain from combining spells correctly inside of Nexus Spike. So let's get started. If you're going to be using Nexus Spike, you are going to need to know the mechanics behind how it works. So let's get the core mechanics out of the way. First, you are obviously picking two spells to put into Nexus Spike. There are two spells currently in your deck. You cannot pick the exact same card twice, but if you have multiple copies of a card, you can put two of the same card in there. Now, when you pick these spells, things to keep in mind, the upgrades you have in those spells do not carry over into the Nexus Spike. Though you can put new upgrades into Nexus Spike itself, however. When you get your Nexus Spike, and this is something that's often forgotten, even sometimes by players like me who's done many, many hours in the game, is Nexus Spike cannot target bosses. However, it can target mini bosses, and we'll talk more about that later. Also, the spells you choose, there's two categories of spells. There are targeted spells or on-targeted spells. So a targeted spell is any spell that when you click it, you have to select a unit on your side or the enemy side to target with the spell. An on-targeted spell is you cast it and it will play the spell's effect out for you. As I said, for the Nexus Spike event, you have spells that are targeted and on-targeted, and I just like to show some gameplay with this. So if you have the Nexus Spike event, let's pull it up. Right, you have all your spells. So for example, Echo Break is a targeted spell. So if I choose this as my first one, I go on my deck, you notice I can't choose these glimmers anymore because the glimmers do not have a target. But I can choose any of these other spells that have a target. Same thing, if I choose Glimmer, then I can only choose my second copy of Glimmer as the second spell because everything else in this deck is a targeted spell and is not eligible. You can't mix between targeted and non-targeted spells when you construct a Nexus Spike spell. One fun thing of the mechanics with Nexus Spike is that it gains all keywords from the spells you include in this Nexus Spike. Now, these keywords can vary, but some unique ones are Purge. So if your spell had Purge, you put it in there, now your Nexus Spike will have Purge. If your spell has Offering or Attuned, Nexus Spike will gain either of those. So Offering, of course, is when you discard the card that plays the spell, so that would play the Nexus Spike without having to pay its 2 Ember cost. Attuned gives it the 5 times spell damage. Do note that Attuned does not stack, though. You can put Extract inside of it. If you use Extract, one thing to keep in mind, if you have multiple extract cards in a Nexus Spike, it uses the higher of the extract values. So if you put Echo Transfer in there with an Extract 2, but you put something else that has an Extract 1 cost in there, your Nexus Spike would have Extract 2. If you put the Insanity spell in there that takes 666 HP, then it would have Extract 6. So whatever the higher extract cost is the amount of extract you will have in your Nexus Spike. Slay, there's a few spells like Good Old Wingmaker, Plink, that have Slay, and that Slay effect will get copied over into Nexus Spike. Permafrost, so something like Ice Tornado with Permafrost, that gets copied into Nexus Spike as well. And of course, things like piercing. If the spell had piercing, your Nexus Spike will have piercing. So when you put keywords into the Nexus Spike, it will gain those keywords. Do note Nexus Spike already comes with consume, so that one's not getting a feature at the moment. As I mentioned, you gain the keywords in these spells when you combine them. So let's look at that with extract. So I have echo transfer. I'm going to select that as spell 1. I'm going to select perfect insanity as spell 2. Now you'll notice, and I'll bring this up again, we'll pull up the deck. My Nexus Spike gained the extract keyword. Specifically, it only has extract 6 on it, because when you mix 2 extract keywords together, only the highest one matters for the spell itself. Something to keep in mind, this is going to be very, very important, not just for playing cards in the Nexus Spike, but also some of the combos I'll be going over. The order matters. You put in spell 1 and then you put in spell 2. Nexus Spike will play the spells in that order. It will play spell 1 first and then it will play spell 2 second. This can make Nexus Spike super strong if used correctly, or you can completely neuter the card if you do it incorrectly. As I mentioned, the order of the Nexus Spike matters. So I have 2 Nexus Spikes, both containing a Cycle of Life and Symphony of the Soul. The one on the left here is Cycle of Life, then Symphony. The second one is Symphony, then Cycle of Life. So let's cast this one. So we're going to play Symphony first and then Cycle of Life. I have 10 spikes. When I target this, right, I'm going to double first, and then I'm going to gain 3 spikes. I should end at 23 spikes. There we go. But let's restart that. And let's say we did it the other way. So instead, let's play Cycle of Life, then the Symphony of the Soul. So that's going to pump me to 13 and then double to 26 spikes. So as I've mentioned, the order matters. This Nexus Spike will play the spells in the order you put them in, so you want to make sure you pick carefully. One last mechanic that ties in with order matters. When you have targeted spells in your Nexus Spike, the first spell you put in there determines what you can target. So if you choose a spell that can only target your units as the first spell, Nexus Spike can only target your units, no matter what the second spell you put in there is. However, if you choose a spell that can target any unit, then your Nexus Spike can target any unit no matter what the second spell is, and we will highlight this later on in the guide. We know what can go in Nexus Spike, but let's actually mention what can't go in Nexus Spike, because this does mean certain cards can't be used for Nexus Spike combos. So to begin with, the biggest category is X cost spells. Now there are actually a lot of X cost spells in the game, and none of these can go into Nexus Spike. Just something to keep in mind. I don't know if there was a power level or a coding issue. Honestly, a lot of Nexus Spike decisions, I'm not sure why they may or may not have chosen stuff for the most part, but you cannot put a X cost spell into a Nexus Spike. Additionally, sacrifice spells, so cannibalize impressive important work, those cannot go into Nexus Spike either, and that's probably for the better, especially with some of the targeting rules that you can run into with Nexus Spike, but sacrifice spells cannot go in there. Non-unit spells that have targets. In other words, I should say targeted spells that don't target units. That would be things like Broken Memories and Returned Soul, which returns a specific card from your consume pile or specific card from the discard pile, or Offering Token and Preserve, which target a specific card in your hand. Those cannot be used in Nexus Spike. And then there's a few other miscellaneous spells. So for example, Bone Dog's Favor, because you can't actually play it. Old Magic. This one was probably a balance reason because Old Magic itself has no text. So maybe they didn't want to deal with that. And then maybe that balance led into a coding reason, who knows? But spreading spores is definitely a balance reason. They don't want you to easily gain access to a lot of copies of your Nexus Spike, so spreading spores is unfortunately something that cannot go into it. When you use the Nexus Spike, sometimes you just want some pure value to put in there. So these are all spells I consider just good value spells to put in Nexus Spike, not necessarily a strong combo or anything, but just good value. And these are going to be high cost spells and consume spells. So Nexus Spike costs 2. So if you put a high cost spell in there or consume spell in there, you're getting a lot of value. So consume spells like these listed here, all that cost 2 or greater, you are getting that 2 cost value out of the Nexus Spike from the spell itself, plus whatever the second spell might be. For high cost spells, Gem Trove, Inferno, Ritual Battle, or even other 2 cost spells that don't have extract like Symphony of the Soul or Hallowed Halls, you're adding more density of that spell to your deck, in addition to getting the second effect when you have it inside of a Nexus Spike. Now, these all pass, when you consider the fact that Nexus Spike costs 2, it pass what I call kind of the Eternal Stone test. If you put +1 and remove consume into Nexus Spike, does that Nexus Spike still worth it, right? So if you take something like One Horn's Tome, which costs 5, Last Stand, which costs 3, you put that in Nexus Spike and you remove consume it, you get better versions of those base spells. Same thing, if you're doing Gem Trove, Infernal, Ritual of Battle, those cost 3 or 4. If you put an Eternal Stone in that Nexus Spike, you have either gotten a discount or the same cost of that spell plus an additional effect. For Symphony of the Soul, Hallowed Halls, I include those, even though the cost now is 1 greater if you Eternal Kinstone it, or Eternal Stone it. You are still getting A, more density of that key spell inside of your deck, which can be really strong. And B, those are actually both cards I would still play if they cost 1 more. Doubling your buffs, Hallowed Halls, those are amazing cards to play, even if it costs 1 additional ember. So these are just, high value cards, so consume cards that you're already willing to pay 2 or more ember for, high value cards, a lot of damage, a lot of either 2 of floor or in the form of rage or reforms. Those are all high value spells that are great initial targets just to make a strong Nexus Spike spell without getting too fancy with any of our interactions. Nexus Spike also, besides out value, can be great for infinites. So if you have not watched it, maybe you should watch my guide to infinite combos in Monster Train. Just a suggestion. But one thing to keep in mind when you do these infinites, you often need the Helvens. You often have to dupe a key spell to get this infinite to work. And Nexus Spike can serve as a copy of that key spell. It can serve as a copy of Wormkin Etchings plus a bonus effect. It can serve as a copy of Deep Offering plus a bonus effect. And it can serve as a copy of Excavated Embers if you manage to get those from, the Concealed Cavern event as well. Now, the fun part about these infinites is not only can our Nexus Spike serve as just a copy of one of these spells, it can also be the combo itself, right? So if you put, let's say, a Wormkin Etchings and an Excavated Ember into a Nexus Spike, you return 5 consumed spells, which if you have nothing in there, that's fine. You draw a card, gain 2 Ember. Then you cast a second copy of that Nexus Spike. You will return the original one if you have Wormkin Etchings first, and then if the Excavated Ember was second, you'll redraw it and gain 2 Ember. That's an infinite consume combo right there. And it's Ember neutral because you're spending 2 Ember and gaining 2 Ember at the same time. Same thing if you have 2 Excavated Embers in a remove consume Nexus Spike, then you're drawing 2 cards and gaining a total of 4 Ember, which is at least +1 Ember. You could also do Wormkin Etchings plus Deep Offering in that order. So that way you return 5 consume spells, discard your hand, and draw 5 consume spells. If you return a Nexus Spike that way, then you're redrawing an old Nexus Spike and you keep playing that chain over and over and over again. So it can not only serve as a copy of spells for infinites, it can be the infinite combo card itself that's going to win you the game. As I said, Nexus Spike itself can be the combo. So here I have Nexus Spike with a Wormkin Etchings and a Deep Offering in that specific order. I have one of those in my consume pile as well. So what I'm going to do is I am going to cast number 1. This is going to return the etchings to the top of my deck. By the way, we can check there's no more here. There's no more here, just to make sure. So it's going to return the top one to my deck, and then I'm going to draw 5. So I draw it, and I'm going to just keep repeating. I can ping things out, repeat, look at that, and we can just keep repeating this forever, as long as we want, right? And this is now an infinite combo, depending on what you have for your deck and payout, right? So eventually I have like the free Echo Break in this specific one. I have a Titan's Tooth as well, that's more damage, but it's Nexus Spike being used as the center of the infinite. With a Nexus Spike, even though it can't target bosses, you can make some really interesting damage spells in general. And that's often done if you mix together AoE or multi-target spells with scaling spells. So AoE, area of effect spells, would be things like Glimmer, Inferno, Titan's Tooth, Wingmaker. And additionally with that, I also include Ice Tornado and Ice Storm. They're not AoE, but they are multi-hit. Now I specifically chose flat damage multi-hit spells because that's very important, because you pair this with a scaling spell. Now what happens is the scaling spell will determine the amount of damage you are doing. So for example, if you are doing 100 damage with a battering ram and you have that paired with an ice storm, it doesn't matter the order in this case, you will deal 100 damage from the ice or from the battering ram part of the Nexus Spike, as well as 5 times 100 damage due to the ice storm. So these scaling spells set the flat damage these multi-hit or AoE spells do. Another example, if you're doing, say, 500 damage with a Bramble Lash, and you put that in with a Glimmer, you'll do a 500 damage Bramble Lash, and then you'll do a Glimmer effect for 500 damage across the floor. Now, order once again does matter, in that if you do an AoE spell, so one of the 4 first spells on the left, Glimmer, Titan's Tooth, Inferno, Wingmaker, followed by the scaling spell, you will get the increased AoE damage first, followed by the cast of the next spell second. And this can be really important for clearing out wide or heavy waves as you fight through the DLC. I'm going to show what happens when you have an AoE spell mixed with a scaling damage spell. So AoE, area of effect, so full row, plus scaling damage in a Nexus Spike. Now I'm going to show 3 different versions. So the first one is I'm going to show Ancient Synergy, then Glimmer. Now when I cast this, notice I'll kill everything, which is great. But what's going to happen is I'm going to get the Ancient Synergy Triple Strike first, followed by the AoE. So we're going to see a bunch of 38s pop up on the Alabaster Guardian first, and then the 38s on the back line. Now it's kind of fast, so you have to watch it very carefully, but we can compare this to the opposite spell. We can do Glimmer Ancient Synergy. Now, when you put the AoE spell first, no matter the order, if you put an AoE spell plus scaling, if it's a flat damage AoE, I should clarify, the AoE damage will scale. Now, when I have Glimmer first, I'm actually going to get that 38 AoE first, and then I'm going to do just the Ancient Synergy proc. So when I cast this one, Glimmer Ancient Synergy, I'm going to do 38 across the board, and then I'm going to do multiple 38s to the Guardian. And we'll watch these numbers pop up. Be careful and watch closely. 38s across, and then a bunch of 38s on the Guardian. So that just goes to show the order does matter, but as long as it's a flat damage AoE spell plus scaling, that AoE will scale still. But it's better to do the AoE spell first and then the flat damage second. Let's see this one more time with a different spell. This time it's going to be Glimmer plus Bramble-Lash. So here, if I have Glimmer Bramble-Lash, I have Bramble-Lash Glimmer. So if I Bramble-Lash Glimmer, I'll take out the front one, and then I will do AoE damage. Front one's dead, AoE, the rest die. Alright. And if we do the opposite, if I do Glimmer Bramble-Lash, I'm going to do 200 AoE first, and I'm not going to get that last blast. So you notice that I do the 200 first, and then it finishes the spell. So flat AoE damage plus a scaling spell will scale that AoE damage in your Nexus Spike. If you put the AoE spell first, such as a Glimmer, then you'll do that scaling damage across the row before you get the second spell's effect, which can be much stronger when you're dealing with heavy tanks or really wide waves such as versus the last Divinity. Now you might think, if AoE spells and scaling spells work together really well, what about multiple scaling spells? And unfortunately, this is a bit of a nombo. If you have multiple scaling spells together, the first spell you put in there determines how much damage you deal, and the second spell won't add any additional damage. It can add additional hits, but it won't add more damage. So for example, if you put in a battering ram first, your Nexus Spike will deal damage equal to the battering ram, and if you had, let's say, a fatal melting second, you won't get any extra damage for each friendly death. However, you will still get its AoE effect, so that can be useful, but do note it only scales off, if you have multiple scaling spells in Nexus Spike, it only scales off of the first scaling spell put into it. The second scaling spell will not change the damage you deal. So when you have two different scaling spells mixed into a Nexus Spike, it's important to know that the first spell that scales is the one that determines the damage. So what I mean by scaling spells here, I have Ancient Synergy and Bramble-Lash mixed into a Nexus Spike. First Ancient Synergy, then Lash, then Lash followed by Synergy. You'll notice right away from the damages that the Synergy plus Bramble-Lash is already doing 50 damage, where the Lash followed by Synergy is doing 0 because I have no spikes out. It's the first spell that's determining how much damage I will get out. And just to be clear, right, this Ancient Synergy is doing 50, hence why this is a 50 damage. Now when I play my Spike Sentient, right, the second scaling spell is not changing the damage value whatsoever. But if we look at our first one, now the Nexus Spike is doing 100 damage because it's doing the 10 times our scaling Bramble-Lash, the first spell. So if you have two scaling spells in Nexus Spike, the first spell is going to determine how much damage you are doing with that Nexus Spike. And the second spell is not going to affect the damage at all, right? If they combine, these would be doing 150, but if I play this first one, we can watch, I do 100 damage 4 times. I don't do 50 damage at all. So spell 1, when 2 scaling spells are mixed together, spell 1 will determine your damage. Spell 2 does not change your damage at all. Next, I want to talk about a set of spells I call the mini boss killers. So Nexus Spike can't be used on actual bosses that you fight in Relentless, but you can use them on the mini bosses of the last Divinity if you know how to set it up. And so these mini boss killer spells I'm going to bring up are One Horn's Tome, Adaptive Mutation, and Whiplash. Now, normally, if you notice these are to a friendly unit only. However, if you put a spell in Nexus Spike that can target any unit first, and then put in one of these 3 spells second, then you can target enemy units, which means you could give those mini bosses Fragile, or you could swap their attack and their health, so they do a lot of damage, but they might have only 20 health. Or you could give them Burnout, and they would burn out and die once that burnout counter ends. For the mini boss killer spells, this takes advantage of our targeting abilities to modify the stats of these mini bosses. So for example, if I have any target card, such as Restore followed by Whiplash, I can give it Burnout, which means this unit will die in 2 turns. If I have any target spell in One Horn's Tome, I can give it Fragile. And if I have any target spell with Adaptive Mutation, I can swap its attack to its health, right? So all 3 of these are ways where you can make a much easier to handle mini boss unit depending on what your deck has for capabilities, as well as your ability to damage or deal with or stall out the mini boss. I mentioned Slay as a keyword that can go in Nexus Spike earlier, but let's talk about some specific interactions that you can actually do that are pretty powerful, right? So we do have about 7 Slay cards that can go in Nexus Spike. You have on-targeted ones such as Excavation Eruption, Plink, Wingmaker, those all can go in it. And you have targeted ones like Entumbra Assault, Subsuming Blade, Petty Theft, and Revenge of the Damned. Now, with some of these, you can play around. For example, you can get some really big damaging spells with Attuned using Subsuming Blade. You could get a lot of morsels from Entumbra Assault. You could change the targeting and be able to ping your own units with Petty Theft in order to get more money. Now, it's the on-targeted spells that are more interesting, right? So, for example, if you pair those with some spells that are guaranteed to get kills, I'm going to pull up 3: Crushing Demise, Hallowed Halls, and Inferno, right? You put up Inferno inside of Excavation Eruption, and you can suddenly wipe the whole entire floor of their units, maybe your units, if you same floor, and get a lot of Ember for each one you kill. Same with Crushing Demise. Now, the most unique one, of course, is Hallowed Halls. Right, you put Hallowed Halls and one of these Slay non-targeted spells in there, you're going to clear off your side of the floor, and then if it's Plink, you're going to generate a morsel for each unit killed. If it's Excavation Eruption, you're going to get 2 Ember for each of your units that you killed. And if it's Wingmaker with Hallowed Halls, you're going to get a larger and larger floor for each of your units that you killed. And that's just going to actually help you make a larger and better Hallowed Halls floor. So these Slay effects, you can play around with the targeting, and with the A.O.E. ones, you can get them to hit your own units as well to increase the number of Slay triggers you get from your Nexus Spike. Slay effects with Nexus Spike can be incredibly strong. Why? Because the Slay effects count anything that might die, including your own units. You can use this to for some really strong combinations. So for example, this one, I have a Wingmaker and Hollowed Halls in here. And so what's going to happen, right? Hollowed Halls is going to kill my 4 units. Wingmaker is going to kill this. I'm going to go from 4 pips to 9 pips by killing those units. Watch. Look at that. So for each unit, including my own that just died, I get more pips out, which allows me to get larger and larger hollowed halls and more units on the floor. So you can really use those slay effects with kill effects that hit enemy units and your own units to really boost the power of that Nexus Spike. Now we're going to get into the really fun part. We're going to talk about some specific Nexus Spike combos. These are the Nexus Spike interactions that people talk about, or you might see mentioned, that seem like they make absolutely 0 sense, but they work and they are going to win you the run. And the first one of these is Shroud Mitosis. Shroud Mitosis creates 3 copies of a morsel unit. Now, once again, if you're paying attention to the targeting rules and you put a spell that can target any unit first, followed by the Shroud Mitosis second, then you can target any unit with that Nexus Spike. You can make 3 copies of your champion this way, 3 copies of your carry unit. You can flood the floors everywhere with copies of your best unit if you put Shroud Mitosis as the second spell in your Nexus Spike. Next, I will be showing this Shroud Mitosis combo. So I have the 2 Nexus Spikes in reverse order. Shroud Mitosis first, followed by Razor Sharp. I can't target my unit because this Shroud Mitosis says it can only target morsels. However, if I do Razor Sharp first, now I can target my unit because it has a target of anything, and I triple it. So that is a super strong combo. Now, I'm going to point out something a little bit weird. This gets a little bit buggy. If the unit you copy has permanent stats like the Steel Singer, right? This is a 30 attack Steel Singer. Watch what happens when I target it with a heal. I healed it, and all of the copies got that rejuvenate bonus. This, I believe, only works for the specific units that have permanent increase in stats. It doesn't work on anything else. It doesn't work with other rejuvenate triggers. So only Steel Singer, Overgorger, or Overgorger's Infusion will you get this really weird permanent buff being applied to the copies after the copies are already made. It can make some really weird scaling floors. But the main combo I wanted to show is any target spell followed by Shroud Mitosis will let you triple any single unit in the game. The next Nexus Spike specific combo is actually with Blazing Bolts. So Blazing Bolts deal 30 damage to the front enemy unit and add a stronger version of this to your discard. That second sentence is the key part of what this makes this a Nexus Spike combo. So when you put this in Nexus Spike, it gains this full text, including add a stronger version. And what that does is when it has this, it'll create a new card titled Blazing Bolts that is the upgraded version of this Blazing Bolts. So here's the level 2 version, but it will still also have the original 2 spells that you put in your Nexus Spike. So if you cast a level 1 Blazing Bolts inside of a Nexus Spike, you create a new spell called Blazing Bolts that has Blazing Bolts 2 text plus the Blazing Bolts 1 text from Nexus Spike plus the second spell text from Nexus Spike. Then if you cast that one, or if you had originally put Blazing Bolts 2 into Nexus Spike, Since it still has that line about adding a stronger copy, it creates a new Blazing Bolts card with the Blazing Bolts 3 text, as well as the Blazing Bolts 2 text from Nexus Spike, plus the second spell from Nexus Spike. So what this does is it creates copies of your Nexus Spike card, but now instead of being Nexus Spike, it's Blazing Bolts, and it carries over all of the upgrades, as well as the fact that it's no longer Nexus Spike. It can now target or deal damage to bosses. Let's watch this Blazing Bolt shenanigans in action. So here I have Blazing Bolt level 1 in a Nexus Spike. Deal 30 damage to the front enemy unit, so I cast that, I deal 30 damage to the front. And the second spell get cast as well. When I look at my discard pile, now I have a new card. It's Blazing Bolts. It's no longer Nexus Spike, it's Blazing Bolts with the Purge offering all the previous keywords. And it has new text. It deals 30 damage to a random enemy unit 2 times. So that's the level 2 Blazing Bolt text, but it still also has play Blazing Bolts, deal 30 damage to the front enemy unit. So by playing a level 1 Blazing Bolt in a Nexus Spike, I create a Blazing Bolt that's level 2 with both Nexus Spike spells in it, including the original level 1 Nexus Spike's Blazing Bolts. Same thing, if I have a Nexus Spike with level 2 Blazing Bolt, deal 30 damage to a random enemy 2 times. I cast it. I deal my 30 damages. I check my discard pile. Now I have a new Blazing Bolt. All the keywords, Purge, offering attuned intrinsic. Deal 30 damage to a random enemy unit 4 times. So that's the highest tier 3 Blazing Bolt. Plus it has Blazing Bolt in the second spell text. So it still deals 30 damage to a random enemy 2 times and adds a new version into the deck. So it just keeps adding new and new versions. If you have the level 1 Blazing Bolt and cast it, you're going to start growing your deck size. If you have the level 2 Blazing Bolt and you cast it, you're going to simply replace it with a new version that's going to keep creating level 3s. It's really silly, really strong. You'll also notice they both carry over the upgrades from the Nexus Spike. Now, if you thought the Blazing Bolts combo could not get any sillier or more powerful, you are wrong, and it can. And that is if you put Gifts for a Guard as the second spell inside of that Nexus Spike. So the Blazing Bolts will create a copy, and then this Gifts for a Guard, if your deck is thin enough or you've purged or consumed enough cards from your deck, will draw that newly created copy and make it cost 0 with plus 20 magic power. That means you'll draw a new Blazing Bolt Nexus Spike, which you can play to create another Blazing Bolt Nexus Spike. The Gift for a Guard will draw that one, and you repeat this as an infinite combo that quickly scales in damage. And since, once again, it's a Blazing Bolt card itself, it will kill bosses, which makes it a very rare but very, very potent infinite combo. Now the Blazing Bolt combo gets really ridiculous if you high roll into a Nexus Spike with the Blazing Bolts and Gifts for a Guard. And so what happens is once you start getting these copies, eventually you'll thin down your deck, you'll cast this Blazing Bolt Nexus Spike. It's going to create a copy into my discard pile. And then with Gift of the Guard second, I'm going to redraw it for more damage. So I'm going to play it. I deal damage, I redraw it. I have 120 damage one. I play it. I draw a new one that I just created for 140 damage. And you'll notice, since this is no longer a Nexus Spike, but a Blazing Bolt, it actually can damage the boss. And this creates a very rare, but very, very strong infinite combo that you can encounter. The third crazy combo I'm going to talk about for Nexus Spike is a Stygian exclusive combo, and that is Deep Offering plus a Offering card. And so how this works is you want to do, hopefully, if you can, a spell chain version of this Nexus Spike with remove consume. And what happens, you just keep duping it. You play one copy of your Nexus Spike. It's going to discard your hand, draw 5 new cards, and if you discarded any other Nexus Spikes that way, it will then play them. This is going to keep chaining Nexus Spikes plus your offering card in an infinite cycle, depending on the size of your deck, or a pseudo-infinite if you have a large deck. Now, depending on, obviously this can't kill bosses, right? Because you can't target or hurt bosses with your offering card. But if you put something like Crypt Builder in there or Titan's Tooth, those spells probably are still in your deck. So you will slowly gain more and more damage. You do have to be careful if you do not have a payout, because you can literally get stuck in an infinite loop, unable to do anything, and it gets really buggy if that happens. So this is the deep offering plus an offering spell into Nexus Spike combo. And the goal is you want remove consume on the Nexus Spike and preferably Twinstone, and as many copies of this Nexus Spike as you can make. So I have a Crypt Builder in here with offering, and this might take 1 or 2 casts to get to a true infinite, but I'm going to cast the first one. That's going to discard my hand, casting the second one, which creates a spell chain copy, right? So we do this, we discard my hand, spell chain copy, triggers, play some more. Now I have some new ones in hand. I'm going to try it one more time. And now, since I'm triggering multiple of these Nexus Spikes each time per hand, it's going to continuously cycle this as an infinite combo on its own without me having to do anything. Now you do have to be careful with this combo. If you try to use this infinite without a way to kill a boss or against a non-boss wave, it gets super buggy. Look at this. I have now an original 8-card deck. I have over 100 some cards. This combo creates duplicates, and if you look, even the art is starting to get weird in this, right? It's starting to clip, it's starting to rotate. Things are getting very, very odd if you are not careful with this combo. So only make sure to use this combo if you're against a flying boss and can kill it with your other offering spells, or maybe even a token of the traitor. Never use this against a wave with no boss, or you're going to lock yourself out of playing the game until you restart the battle. While there are some game-winning combos, there are also some rather buggy interactions as well that you can encounter with Nexus Spike. I'm going to highlight only a couple just because there's a lot of testing to figure out all of these bug interactions. But for example, Crypt Builder and Restoration Detonation can encounter some buggy interactions where Crypt Builder can end up pushing your frontline unit to the back. And that typically happens if you have some sort of on-targeted spell first that can affect your units. And Restoration Detonation sometimes will not deal proper damage. Technically, Restoration Detonation is a scaling damage spell, but it's based on how much you heal. However, when you have other spells in it, that can override the damage amount, and you'll see that as well. Of the buggy interactions that aren't good, Crypt Builder's pretty common among them. So I have 2 Nexus Spikes that are flipped between Glimmer and Crypt Builder. Now, using our previous knowledge, we can kind of predict what's going to happen here, right? So if I do Crypt Builder Glimmer, I'm going to play Crypt Builder. It's going to target front enemies, and then it's going to play a Glimmer for the A.O.E, right? I do that. That's exactly what happens. I move that front enemy back. However, if you have Glimmer then Crypt Builder, now it says, I'm targeting ally units and enemy units, and then I'm applying Crypt Builder to both sides. So when I have Crypt Builder second on something that can target my ally units, watch. my ally units swapped positions because the Crypt Builder push not only gets applied to the enemies from the Glimmer, but also to my allied units as well. Another of the buggy interactions often involves a restoration detonation inside of Nexus Spike. Sometimes you don't get the heal, sometimes you don't get the damage correctly. But for example, if we look at here, I have Nexus Spike with Power of Knowledge in them, as well as Restoration Detonation, either Power of Knowledge first, then Detonation second, or Detonation first, Power of Knowledge second. You'll notice I can cast this to heal my guy, either way, right? But I'm not doing damage to the front unit. I am getting that 10 heal, so it doesn't matter which one I cast, I get the heal, no damage to the front unit, but now that I have a consume spell, I'm going to do damage. And it's not going to be the detonation damage though, it's going to be the 15 damage of Power of Knowledge instead of the 10, or sorry, the 10, 5 times the amount healed, or 50 damage. So while Restoration Detonation is kind of a scaling damage spell, it doesn't follow our previous rules for how it scales in damage. The detonation damage is going to be equal to whatever the second spell is, which can make it kind of difficult to put into a Nexus Spike. I've covered a good amount of Nexus Spike interactions, some super just strong combinations, some that are just a little bit buggy and weird and weaker, and some ways that, you know, are literally game winners. And you wonder, maybe that does work, that doesn't work. But there's only one I consider to be a game breaker just because of how broken the interaction is. And unfortunately for you, the viewers, I am not going to tell you what the interaction is. I've encountered this with 2 different Nexus Spike combinations, and it's literally, and you'll see this, it's literally you take your Nexus Spike and you just run it over every single unit that you can see, and those units die. You don't even cast the Nexus Spike itself, you just have the Nexus Spike in your hand, and you use it on the floor without playing it, and you kill everything. And it is super buggy. It's not even like not some sort of explanation you can give as like, this makes sense as interaction. No, it's just buggy, and I'm considering this the sole game breaker of the Nexus Spike interactions. So this game breaking Nexus Spike interaction, I'm not going to show you what's on there, but you're going to see what happens. I'm going to select my Nexus Spike, I'm going to run over the enemy units, and what you'll see right now, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but look at, they all are just that. I'm going to do it to the next floor. Bam, 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 bam. Can't see what the Nexus Spike is. Now you see currently this time I am stuck on the floor. Sometimes this happens when you do this interaction until you cast something else. I'm just going to hit end turn. And look at that. I bugged out the sound. These enemies are still there. They haven't moved. They're just kind of dead. Look at this. I lost my sentient on the bottom floor. It's also just kind of dead. We can just keep doing this across floors. Oh, I'm stuck again, so let's hit end of turn. I'm going to just wipe out the next floor and turn. One got up there because of stuff. I can wipe out this floor. I can wipe out this floor. Can't target the boss, hit end turn. But basically what it is doing, it's like deleting the enemies, not removing their images. It's bugging out a little bit of everything. The noises, look at, they're still there. It's just super weird, super buggy. It deletes anything you run your spell over. And yeah, it is the most game-breaking, bugged thing I have found with Nexus Spike. I found a couple of ways to do this, and this is just one of them. And I'm not going to tell you the cards because I just think it's way too broken to be an actual interaction that people should be able to do. Finally, I'm going to talk about one last thing. Now, this isn't technically Nexus Spike itself, but it is the event that gives you Nexus Spike. And there is that second option that gives a spell of your choice Unhinged Power. And what Unhinged Power does is it creates 3 copies of that spell, makes them all cost 0 Ember, and gives them Purge. Now, that is useful in a few situations, and I'm going to highlight the main 3 in my opinion. First off is you find Nexus Spike Ring 3. You don't have any strong spells you put in there, so you just do Unhinged Power in a starter. Now, I chose Foregone Power as the image for this one because Foregone Power is a starter spell that is strong early and gets worse as the game goes on. So getting those 3 additional copies can be very useful in your Ring 3 fight, but after that, it does reduce your overall deck size by 1 after you play all 3. So when you have weak starters and you want to get rid of them, Unhinged Power can help you with that. The second one, and this is a really fun, interesting combination that I've done before. I don't believe I recorded it, but I have done this and does work, is if you have Bone Dog's Favor and you put permafrost in it. And what this does, because when you add Unhinged Power, it keeps all of the previous upgrades in there, you will get 3 unplayable permafrost copies of Bone Dog's Favor that stick in your hand, which means you are healing 15 pyre health around once you get all 3. And since you are not playing them, they're only reserved in your hand, they stick around forever. And it's a really amusing strategy to just super pump up your pyre health and face tank with your pyre that way, but it's also pretty rare. Third one, also really rare, but actually super strong, is if you get the Battlefield Armageddon event where you choose one of those 3 spells, hold it for 2 rounds, and then you get the Hope for Peace artifact that turns all purge effects into consume effects for your spells. That means if you get that Battlefield Armageddon event on Ring 3, and then you find Nexus Spike Ring 5 or 6 or 7, you can get 3 0-cost copies of a spell in your deck, and they will have Consume, which means you can put Remove Consume in them, you can put other upgrades, but they won't purge in between fights. So you basically get 3 super good copies of a spell that are free to play and it has Consume, and that can definitely bring you a lot of power if you have some high impact spells that already have Consume in them. But those are really the main 3 areas I would pick that Unhinged Power. I don't have anything good for Nexus Spike. I have something super interesting like Bone Dog's Favor, or I have something super strong like Hope for Peace as the artifact. But otherwise, the Nexus Spike card itself is just so much fun that it's pretty rare to choose this one. With that, I have finished my guide to Nexus Spike. Now, this is not a comprehensive guide, so if you think I missed any combinations or combos or interactions with Nexus Spike, it is quite possible. It is a very complex card and it has so many interactions, and it would take way too much time to test every single one. But if you believe I missed one, or if you found one that is not in this video, please leave a comment about that, and I will make sure to check it out and report back to you. But otherwise, thank you for watching and have fun.